calm the mind from restless thoughts? Overactive thoughts.
Overactive thoughts, overactive
Thinking.
mind. Well, the overactive thoughts are basically already a symptom of you being overly committed or overly engaged or overly invested emotionally in things. So you can't necessarily directly just go head on and stop your thoughts, because that would be also a form of thinking, which means you'll be contradicting internally. But what you can do is basically see how they came to be. How did you end up in a place of your mind spinning out of control? And I think always you will find out that it's because you were not restrained beforehand. You were not restrained in things you said, things you done, things you wanted to do, and now obviously the mind is still sort of running on that momentum. So the most you can do in those cases is just not add more to it. Don't do any things by body, speech, or further by mind on account of a restless, spinning out of control mind. But endure it, because it will tire out and calm down. But you try to learn from it in a sense of this is an indication of a problem. It's not a problem in itself. The problem in itself is basically the fact that you were acting unrestrained. As in, you got into an argument, you said things out of heat, or some, like, I don't know, over engaged in sensuality, and then you overly committed and you couldn't stop when you wanted to. And now you're paying the consequence, and things didn't end up the way you wanted to, and so on. And then yes, then the mind is just going to be revolving like crazy, but because of your behavior. You wouldn't have had the ground nor momentum for such a wild spinning if you didn't provide it for it. But if you just try to, I must stop thinking, and give me a meditation technique, so I'll stop thinking yet not change my behavior, it won't work. Because most of these things, when they pertain to mind, they're more of like symptoms of the underlying issue of greed, aversion, delusion, ill will, lust, and so on. They are not the problem in themselves. Because people usually think, meditation or something will help me like control my mind. But underneath that, I'll still do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it, however I want to do it. And it doesn't work like that.
You want a quick fix.
Yeah. Well, basically, you want to believe that removal of the symptoms removes the underlying illness. It doesn't.
What about like indecisiveness? Should I choose this? Should I choose that? And then weighing each side up. Choice.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. In a way of, fine to a degree, but obviously it can become an issue when you just can't commit to a choice. When you expect choice to be made for you, so you don't feel responsible. And even that is a symptom of you not accepting responsibility in the first place. Because whatever you choose, even if it feels like that the choice was placed upon you by circumstances, you choose to accept it, because you can say no to anything. So if you start thinking along those lines, in terms of that you can't avoid responsibility no matter what you do, then it becomes different. Then you will obviously think twice, even in regard to small decisions, but then at the same time, you won't feel like it's the end of the world in regard to big decisions. Because responsibility has been brought back on you, so you're not ignoring it anymore. And that's why people get into that indecisive state, is because really what they're indecisive about is whether they should take responsibility or not. But that's what I mean, if you start reflecting upon it, you'll see that that's not an optional matter. You're already responsible.
So then most likely you would make a good decision, a better decision.
Well, a better decision, yeah. It might not end up the way you would hope to, but you won't be affected by that as much as you would if you try to pretend that you are not responsible in the first place. That's what people think, like if they refrain from choice, they think they're not choosing. But refraining from choice is your choice in regard to some other particular choices, which means it's equally a choice. But if I don't commit to this or that, I avoid being sort of burdened by those things. But actually, you were just burdened by non-committal, which can be even worse burden because it's much harder to see.
And a person could be stuck in that for a very long time.
Oh yeah, forever. Well, forever, I mean, relatively speaking. But yeah, it establishes itself on the level of a view. So unless you dig it up yourself and sort of develop transparency through it and see what it is, yeah, you will maintain that view for the rest of your life. And think you're avoiding responsibility. Just in reality, all you're doing really is making making choices from a more inferior perspective. Because once you accept responsibility, your perspective is much bigger. It's more unpleasant initially, but overall, actually, you have a greater perspective on things and weight and what they entail. Ignoring responsibility, you're more like reactionary, sort of reacting to this or that, and then just hope things will end up well. But they don't. I mean, what you regard well, maybe, but overall they don't, because the worst thing you can do is ignore responsibility for your own existence. So it's better off to accept responsibility, and then even if all of your choices end up in failure or whatever, you haven't achieved anything you hoped for, you still took responsibility for it. And that's a greater achievement, actually, than any of those particular achievements of your choice.